and welcome to the Talkback. This is episode 2. I'm Chris from Icethetics.com. Along with me are Grant Beery and Mike Gould, who you met in the first episode. And new to the Talkback Crew is Matt McElroy, who you got to know in the first episode of Identity, right here on the Icethetics YouTube channel. And on the agenda today, helmet ads. It was one of the big changes we saw this season, the NHL allowing sponsors on player uniforms for the first time in the form of helmet decals. Now, we know these are important to the teams in terms of making up for lost revenue during the pandemic. Obviously, they can't fill the seats the way they normally would, so that's a huge chunk of money they're losing out on. So this is one way that they're trying to make some of it back. But the real question is, will this continue on beyond this season? And what does the future hold for ads on NHL uniforms? Grant, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Chris. I think the biggest thing that has really surprised me about the helmet ads is they really don't bother me as much as I thought they would. Everybody, and I'm sure, all you guys here with me today are going to agree with me here. It's kind of one of those things that you hoped you'd never see is any kind of ads on the players themselves. We've seen creep on the ice, whether it be on the boards, more and more ads on the boards, on the ice. Now they're behind the goal line and things like that. But with this being hopefully a temporary thing, I actually wouldn't be that bothered if they make it to next year, because it doesn't really seem to mess up the jerseys at all, which obviously I am very passionate about. And teams seem to be going pretty subtle with them, with a few exceptions. I think the biggest one that really bothers me is the Flyers. That TCS logo is huge on their helmets. Like it's almost takes up the entire side of the helmet, it feels like to me. While you look at other teams where I think the Blues are a pretty good example. It's usually a pretty small logo. That Enterprise logo doesn't really bother me. The Avalanche have a really good one with that ball logo. It looks pretty clean. So from that perspective, I would say these don't bother me near as much as I thought they would.
From my perspective, when I look at these patches on the helmets, I look at them from an aesthetic standpoint like I would any other patch on a uniform. And so the biggest thing for me that I want a team to avoid, purely from a fan's perspective, is having those patches be obtrusive. So from, say, a Calgary perspective, the biggest issue with their jerseys for the last 14 years was that they had patches on the shoulders that didn't match the color scheme of the jersey, which was bad. It looked terrible. And so my main issue with a team, say like Toronto, is if you have their away uniforms that are just blue and white, they have a red logo on their helmet. And that's where it sort of becomes obtrusive to me. And so I understand that Scotiabank probably wants to protect the integrity of their brand. Teams are very protective about that. The most egregious one to me, I would have to sort of agree with Grant. I mean, the one for Philadelphia is pretty bad, but I would stay in Pennsylvania if I was to discuss the worst one, because the Pittsburgh Penguins' gigantic blue square of death on their helmet, the PPG Paints logo on their helmets. I'm glad that they changed it to black where they could, because when it's blue, it is the definition of obtrusive. It is quite poorly done, if you ask me. But I haven't found them to be too obtrusive in most cases. Like if you look at the Vancouver Canucks helmets and they just have, the word Rogers on it, I don't care. That doesn't really detract from anything, if you ask me. The thing that I don't know about it is what the actual sponsors are getting out of it. Like having the name Rogers be on a helmet. That's something that I'm not paid enough to know what that actually means for a company. But my mantra for this is, as long as it's not obtrusive, it's okay.
I want to point out, though, there's one team, the LA Kings, who have probably done the best at this by using that helmet space for a good cause and a good company. That Cal Hope, they, from what I understand, not being from California, do a lot of mental health and wellness stuff around the state. And I think that's quite possibly the best thing you could do with your helmet ads. And that could be the most garish ad on any helmet. But as long as it has a good message, I really don't care what it looks like.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I actually had in my notes here, that the Cal Hope thing was, the Kings did it right. They, not to say the other teams are grabbing at the dollars, but, I'm sure a big company like AEG who owns the Kings could have gotten a Toyota or, somebody to pay a lot of money to put their logo on the side of the helmet, and they went with a smaller, cause basically, that, everybody I think can relate to, and good on the Kings and their organization to utilize that platform for, some good for sure.
Absolutely. And beyond that, just looking at some of the other ones around the league, I always found it funny that Boston played in Toronto Dominion Garden. It's even funnier that they are playing now with helmets that represent Toronto Dominion Bank. That's extremely funny to me. Yeah, like Matt said earlier, I'm quite surprised that the maximum seems to be 2 different sponsors for these teams. I did find it maybe a little on the nose that the only team in Canada that went with 2 different sponsors was the Ottawa Senators. I thought that was just a little bit, I could have seen that one coming. Beyond that, I don't think there's really too much to say other than I do appreciate it, when I think teams pick advertisers that sort of correspond to what their identity is a little bit. So when you have the San Jose Sharks skating around in helmets that say Zoom on them, that's just a little bit funny. I can get behind that a little bit.
I think, it's really interesting that everybody brought up the Pennsylvania teams, having the big stickers on the side, because there was directive from the league on the size that these stickers could be. And, I didn't get my tape measure out and look at it, but I think they're a little bigger than they're supposed to be. So I wonder if they got a slap on the wrist, or if, at the end of the day, nobody really cares.
Well, yeah, like it's big, but like, and I think the thing that also just makes it more obtrusive is the lettering. Like the lettering is with a more abstract logo. I think you can get by that. Like with the Scotiabank logo, I don't think that really bothers me too much. But when you have the lettering, I think it just adds a different quality to it that just makes it so much more difficult to miss when you're looking at it. It just makes it stand out so much more. Yeah,
your brain just does such a good job of picking up letters and things that, you definitely see them, more, and even more so than like Capital One or Rogers. It's a real thin, long word. From the shots you're getting on the TV, you can't really tell what it is, but on, Bell, PPG, those sort of things, like Bridgestone, like you can tell that is.
And you also look at some of these logos, like Buffalo comes to mind with not the KeyBank one, but the other company who, Roswell Park. I mean, very busy, a lot of lettering in there. I couldn't say that I've ever noticed it. But you look at something, like UWM on Detroit's helmet, or TCS, PPG, you notice those right away. And so I think you would think that some of these logos that just have a lot on them would be a little bit more kind of unpleasant or ugly. But no, I think it's the idea of having it too big and too prominent is what really bothers me.
There's actually a really interesting design conversation that's happening in the guise of a hockey conversation here. Is that, does that make Bell and, UWM's logos better logos for these companies than some of these other Pacific Premier Bank for the Ducks, for example, right? Like, I know that I'm from Southern California, but does anybody who's not from here recognize that? Like, no. I don't know what, I know what Bell is because I'm in the hockey world, but if I, wasn't, I don't think I would know what that is, but I'd sure be able to read it and look it up. And, to answer the question, I think, Mike, you asked earlier, why are they doing this? That's why, because somebody's going to go, oh, what is that? Like, what is a UWM or, a PNC or whatever? And what is this weird S with a circle in the middle? And, I think that's so interesting.
And I could even jump in there on that too, because I professionally, I work as a brand manager. I don't work in sports or hockey or anything. And so I can say that what you want to do when you're sponsoring a team's helmet like this, for example, you probably have a well-known brand already, or well-known mark, at least within your market. Yeah, maybe you don't know Pacific Premier Bank if you're outside of, Southern California, but that doesn't matter, because really what they're looking for is the local audience.
Right.
And it's that reinforcement of your brand alongside a brand that people feel a strong emotion about. So you're sort of like riding that wave. Another thing I wanted to point out too is that some teams have worked with their sponsors to adjust the colors. Like we talked about Scotiabank, obviously on the Maple Leafs, that red logo really stands out. What the Dallas Stars did, They have black helmets on their home and third jerseys, but their third jersey is such an interesting color mix. It's that black and neon green. It looks like AT&T to agree to doing a white version of their Globe logo instead of that light blue one. So it sort of folds better into the look of the uniform. And the last point I wanted to make on this was, we talk about, well, are people really going to notice these? It's kind of hard to see on TV unless you have a close-up. There are other ways that this pays off. I noticed recently the New York Rangers posting wallpapers for people to download for their phones were picking profile shots where the Chase logo is very prominent.
One thing I did notice is that a lot of these helmet logos, I don't know if this is just opportunity for the presenting sponsors of most of these buildings that people play or that these teams play in. You look at the United Center for the Blackhawks. You look at brand new building sponsor or naming sponsor for the Avalanche with Ball. I think SAP Center for San Jose. I would venture to guess that's something that a lot of these arena sponsors are saying, yes, we want to have an association with the building, but now we can dive a little deeper with that and have an association with the players and the team as well.
Not only that, but this year they're getting a lot less of that recognition because there aren't thousands of people flooding into the building every other night.
Exactly. And you look at a brand new naming sponsor like Ball in Denver, they're not getting that immediate name recognition because people are traveling to the arena. So this is a really smart move on their part because I know their name a lot more now, even though I'm not in the building. And they need to get some kind of, insertion into the market with not, like you said, 20,000 people making their way into the arena. So I think it's a no-brainer with this, kind of the next level for these, naming sponsors to probably not spend a lot of money, but have a lot bigger, exposure and recognition.
I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these arena partners, I bet just from coming from the team side, it's either being bonused to them as part of their make good deals from the sponsorship departments, like, hey, we promise this for this every year in exchange for, X dollar amount. So we can't give you this year. So we're going to give you the helmet sticker. But also, that is your biggest sponsor. To sponsor a building is a multi-year, decade deal for millions of dollars. So it's not to say it's easy money, but that those companies have the pocketbook to pay for something like this. So they were probably the first people that, they went to. I mean, look at, the Knights and Allegiant. Allegiant just spent $1 bazillion. That's an accurate number to sponsor the Raiders building, so obviously they had something to do, some money to spend. So I think that was a natural fit for Vegas.
All right, I think that wraps up the conversation about helmet ads. I'm sure, we'll have more to say about it as the season goes on. We're still pretty early here. But I wanted to move on to talk a little bit about the new anniversary logos. 6 different teams are celebrating anniversaries during this weird pandemic season. So I wanted to get your guys' take on some of the designs that are out there. What are some of your favorites or least favorites?
I think they cover the whole spectrum of what's working and what isn't working. I think right off the bat, the two that really stick out to me are the Jets and the Sharks. And, the Jets have an unreal in-house creative team and they always put out good work. So it's not a super surprise that this looks as good as it does. But you've got the incorporation of the Dale Howard Chuck number 10 and the X for 10. And as much of a bummer that is for that organization, it was a great way for them to tie that in and sort of simplify, what would have had to be 2 patches on their jersey into one potentially. And then, the Sharks are doing a great job of tying back to that original 90s era. And they put out a great graphic explaining, the decisions behind why they made the design choices they did. And it wasn't like overly marketing speak, which is something we see a lot nowadays. I felt like they really dialed it in with the vintage Shark and the old teal, I believe. And, the 30 is in this like Art Deco style that was very prevalent in their original, look. And I think that they knocked it out of the park. And then kind of in that mid-tier, I think Columbus, Minnesota, and Arizona sort of played it a little safe, and the Avalanche missed.
I will say that it looks not great on any kind of digital graphic. I went ahead and purchased the the patch version of it, and if you give me just a sec here. I came prepared and I brought it with me, and I think it looks a heck of a lot better as a patch. I will say they got very clunky with the way that, whatever you want to call that puck swoosh. I don't know if it has an actual name.
The Avalanche.
Yeah, exactly. The way that just kind of, falls out of the two. They could have really, kind of honed that in and done a lot better work in making that look like part of the 25. And so you're right. That is a huge miss on their part. Didn't really need to chrome it out when it came to the digital graphics. I think you could have, really expressed that through embroidery, and didn't need to do that on the digital side of things. I'm going to say that the Columbus is not mid-tier. I think that's one of the best ones. I really like the way it looks. It's bold. And also the fact that they have different versions of it for the different jerseys that they wear, I think is really smart and really clever. So that way you don't have kind of a weird looking patch on, an alternate versus the main jersey. The Wild logo, I've never been a huge fan of the way their numbering looks. And so that's always going to be a miss for me. But beyond that, it's a perfectly fine patch.
Great segue, Grant, because I want to talk about a patch that was around last year that I really disliked. And then I'm going to segue into the Arizona Coyotes one. Watching the Calgary Flames is on some nights a treat, on some nights not a treat. Last year, though, and look, I have tremendous respect for the Calgary Flames design and marketing team, tremendous respect. But they made a huge mistake last year with their 40th anniversary patch, in that they only made it in the retro color scheme, which is great when they were wearing it with the retro jerseys. It looked fine. But then they wore the exact same patch with their jerseys that had black on them, and it looked terrible. It looked really, really bad. They needed to put a black outline in. They needed to make it match the jersey. I don't know why they didn't, but they didn't. And so on the jersey that had black on them, they did not look good. If you Google any of the Flames players from last year, it just does not match. Which is why I like what Columbus and Arizona did this year, in that they both made patches that corresponded both with their primary jerseys and their alternate jerseys, which really probably didn't take them very long to do. But it just makes it look like they spent a lot more time thinking about it. In particular with Arizona's, I can never say enough about how much I adore their Kachina look. It's just such a great look. It's just the best. And even their Howling Coyote look, it looks really good. So I am glad that they incorporated both of those designs into their patch. Just another little detail, though, about the Arizona Coyotes anniversary is they went an extra step this year in adding silver trim to their numbers on their Kachina jersey, which at first I could not stand. It was weird. It didn't look right. It didn't match. It doesn't bother me so much anymore, to the point where if I was a Coyotes fan and I wanted to get a jersey, I would probably get it with the silver trim just to sort of commemorate something different. It's still not perfect. It's interesting, but it's not great. It's not as bad as the Calgary Flames not matching, though. That was really, really not good.
Well, and the funny thing about the Calgary Flames is, that same year you had, I think, at least 2 or 3 other teams that did matching anniversary patches for their jerseys, Vancouver being one of them, where they had that retro jersey they were wearing, and they took that 50th patch and they didn't do it in blue and green. They did it in that was it red and yellow or orange and yellow color, and it looked fantastic. Can you imagine seeing a blue and green patch on the middle of that jersey?
Well, yeah, it ties into the earlier point about things being obtrusive. And on Calgary's jerseys last year, it looked extremely obtrusive. And I'm happy to say that I don't think any of these patches qualify as obtrusive, although I would say the word that you use to describe the puck coming out of the two as falling out is maybe not the term that I would use. It maybe looks like it's being excreted, which is not, it just is not a visual that you want a team to be putting on its jersey.
Right. Well, and another thing you said, with 25 being the silver anniversary, I think Arizona did a much better job of showcasing that silver, because they did, kind of a light gray to showcase it instead of chroming out their logo, which is, from a design perspective, something that I think would have upset a lot less fans on the Avalanche side.
I think there's lots of ways you can do the metallic look that isn't the beveled chrome that they went with for their social stuff. And, it's so hard to say, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that, because obviously none of us were given that brief and, we don't know what they were asked to come up with. The one thing about the Avalanche 25th logo that I do really like that none of these other logos do is it doesn't have the team's logo on it, which to me is important because rarely does it exist in an environment where it won't be accompanied by the primary logo. So to me, that feels redundant. And, that's one thing that I do like about the Sharks and the Jets is they're not one-to-one. The Sharks use their original logo. The Jets use parts of their logo instead of the whole thing. So I feel like the Avalanche have a great idea there, but, maybe fell just a bit short. One thing I do want to talk about, the silver lining of the Arizona 25th patch is that it feels like a downgraded version of their 20th anniversary patch to me. In my eyes, the 20th anniversary patch did a great job of blending the elements from the Kachina logo and their what was current at the time, Howling Coyote, and kind of bring all that together. Whereas the 25th anniversary version, even though there is two versions, just falls a little flat for me for some reason. I don't know if I could put my finger on it. It's just, a 25 in Arizona with the pattern behind it. Like the design isn't as thought out maybe as their 20th anniversary patch was.
One thing you mentioned about the Avalanche logo with it not using the full logo, that's something we saw with their 20th anniversary patch, where they had two different versions. One of the jerseys had a version with the logo on it. If you see behind me, that 20th patch on the jerseys usually didn't have that logo because they knew it would be on a jersey with the logo, but they had a separate version that had the logo. I believe it was either under or over the 20, which again is something that makes a lot of sense. Look back at their 2001 All-Star patch, and that had the same kind of sweeping swoosh, avalanche, whatever you want to call it. So I think they're trying to harken back to that, but I think there would have been a much smarter way for them to put it in there.
And I think that's smart design, right? Like, it's versatile. If you can create a version, and I'm sure somebody in the comments will disagree with me that, you shouldn't have two logos for the same event, but if you can have a version that is your merchandise version that does have your team's logo on it because it's not going to have it, and then a version that works for your patch, in my eyes, there's nothing wrong with that. You're just, creating a design for the environment it lives, which is, in my eyes, good. I'd like everything to be tailored to what it is. And I think we all agree with that because just like you said, like, the Canucks with their different colored version of their 50th patch, that worked really well. You have to know where this is going to go. And I think a lot of times that comes from people higher up not seeing it the way a designer might see it.
And from a league level, you see that with outdoor games, so Winter Classic, Stadium Series, where they have a version with the sponsor in it or without the sponsor, or even, the French version. So there are ways to really do a smart logo design that has different, elements that can be, shoehorned where you need them. Shoehorn's not a really good word, but, used where
incorporated.
You need them. So yeah, exactly. So, and that, I think the NHL does that really well with their outdoor logos, maybe to the point that they're a little boring, but I'm fine with that.
I like how you kind of brought us full circle there, Grant, because I think that's a good point, like how, they've resisted putting any sort of advertising on player uniforms, even to the point of having separate logos for those one-off games where, the sponsor's not listed there. But I want to wrap up that section of the show and move on to one last little quick lightning round for everybody. The Washington Capitals released a brand new third jersey. Kind of surprised us, just sprung it on us. They didn't really have a big lead up or any hype for it. They showed it off, and then the next day they weren't in a game. I want to go around the room and get everybody's opinion on what you thought of the new Washington Capitals third jersey. Mike, why don't you start us off?
I like it. It's their best regular uniform that they wear right now because their home and away uniforms are not good. They're the worst uniforms they've worn, and I don't like them at all. And I have not liked them ever since they started wearing them. The logo on their regular uniforms is the worst logo in the league. It just doesn't look like a logo. So it's nice that the Capitals have a hockey jersey now that looks like a hockey jersey. That's great. It has very bold, a bold W, which is great. It's a logo. It has striping that looks like a hockey jersey striping. Like, I wouldn't complain if the Capitals wore this over their regular jerseys because their regular jerseys are some of the worst in the league. But, it would be good as an alternate if they went back to the Screaming Eagle look that they wore before they switched to the Reebok Edge jerseys. Because that jersey actually had an interesting aesthetic to it, where it looked like there was an eagle flying down onto a perch. Like, that's what that striping looked like to me. The Capitals already went back to that for reverse retro. The Capitals branding to me right now feels all over the place. They're going in a whole bunch of different directions with their main logo that looks like it's a discount ripoff of their old logo from the 80s. They have a W as their alternate logo that doesn't really tie into a whole lot. I mean, the bottom of it kind of looks like the Washington Monument coming up, but I don't see anything that's really grounding their branding. I don't see any main logo with the Capitals. The Capitals brand identity right now is less of a logo and more Alex Ovechkin. There's not really anything that I think ties them all together, sort of like a flaming C or an Avalanche A. There's not really it's hard to sort of discern what the Capitals are doing. But in isolation, the alternate jersey is fine. I give it a 7 out of 10. It's fine.
I think we'll go ahead and call that a hot take. Matt, what about you?
Well, Mike's wrong about everything as usual. I also really like the Caps third jersey, just to put it out there. It does feel a bit too maybe generic for my personal tastes. I think, Chris, you said it in the article really well, that it does feel a little bit like the Rangers Winter Classic jersey. And because they're so close, I think it does draw some direct comparisons. And I would probably lean towards buying the Rangers Winter Classic jersey before this Capitals jersey. But just to get on the Capitals jerseys for a second, their modern logo is much more refined and cleaner than their original logo. I would take that over the original one any day. The Weagle, love it. It's smart design. It's so good. But I do agree that their uniforms as a whole could use a refresh. And I really like the W Washington Monument that they've used now in the Winter Classic, the Stadium Series, and this new third jersey. And I'd love to see the Caps move in that direction and maybe find a way to marry their original brand and this new direction a bit more. I actually put a concept out on Twitter not too long ago that sort of showed that at what I think it could look like. And I think something in that direction, kind of embracing their history but continuing to move forward, is the way to go for the Caps, and that blue suits them. I think you like the 90s era, Mike, like they wore blue then. I think maybe it's time to move on from the seeing red thing or whatever their marketing push is.
All right, Grant, what about you?
So what I will say about this is that it screams almost Team USA to me, the way it looks. It has a very big vibe to me. The first thing I thought of when I saw it on the ice the other day was that they look like Team USA in this jersey, which I think is a great thing for the Capitals. Washington, D.C., they need to really kind of tie into that kind of patriotic American vibe, being there. I will kind of both agree and disagree with both Mike and Matt here, in the sense that it is, I love their regular jerseys. I think the logo could use a little work. So I think the colors and kind of the vibe I'm getting on them is really great. But that logo, I don't like word marks to begin with. And so anytime you can get rid of them, I'm a fan. And so this W kind of, I think, leans them a little closer into having a good primary logo instead of a primary word mark. And I really wouldn't be upset if this became their primary jersey, and I think it would suit them well.
All right, Mike, Grant, Matt, thank you for being here with us today for episode 2 of the Talkback. Hope to have you all back soon. And thank you all for watching the show. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Talkback. To keep new videos coming, I need your support. Take a second to leave a like and a comment, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more. That's all for now. See you next time.